If there's two truths to fantasy RPGs, it's well, first of all, dragons are pretty freaking cool. And two, climbing atop giant enemies and whacking them with your sword will always feel epic. And those are two things in abundance in Eternal Strands from Yellow Brick Games, a new fantasy RPG where you take on the role of Bryn, a magic weaver determined to unravel the mystery of a cataclysmic event that sent her people into near hiding, smashing giant foes with rocks, trees, everything you can grab with your telekinetic abilities. Or you could just yeet them off a cliff. Oh no! I wasn't sure what to expect from the newcomer indie RPG Eternal Strands, a game that only recently came onto my radar after a splashy trailer, but I was already predisposed to give Yellow Brick Games a chance because it is founded by Mike Laidlaw, formerly of BioWare, working on amazing titles like Jade Empire and Mass Effect as co-lead writer and Beneath Drew Karpshin respectively on those games. And of course, the lead designer of one of my favorite RPGs ever made, Dragon Age Origins. And it's nothing like any of those games. But that's not altogether a bad thing. In fact, I would say this is probably closer to a Zelda Breath of the Wild than any of those. And you'll see why when I talk about some of the positives and the things that they could improve on. Really, it's kind of a bite-sized, physics-based Zelda Breath of the Wild-esque RPG that actually really kind of hooked me. It's worth noting before we get too far into this review that Eternal Strands is the first game coming from this new studio, and it is distinctly indie, though at times that's easy to forget given the level of polish in so much of it, from combat, physics, to the visuals and to the cinematics themselves. But let's get into some of the positives and negatives, and we're just going to keep this spoiler free because I want you to go in and play the game. So let's talk about the things that it's doing really well. The action-oriented combat is really fun, if not super deep. Yes, you can block, you can dodge, you can even sort of slow down the game and change weapons if you want. But if you're like me, you'll stick with the fun big old two-hander you made yourself and just destroy things. The game also has a beautiful world with really pretty light diffusion across it, vibrant but not extremely aggressive bright colors, all in a world where you can climb on really anything, move anything, and destroy plenty of things, even entire villages with the same big old two-hander, or by setting them on fire that propagates and grows. You will find that the world feels pretty expansive. You can explore a lot. There's just, there are a couple things with that exploration that I think can be improved on, but we'll get to that in a sec. The story of the game and the world's lore brings you into it kind of slowly. It kind of just feeds you bits of the game to you through osmosis because your character knows all about it. Well, except for the overarching mystery, of course. But you get to learn bit by bit as you go through it. You get to learn more, not just about where you are, but all these far-flung locations where other people have come from. And you get to learn that through your companions. There's also a surprising depth if you look into it, especially with some of the deeper and longer codex entries. It also has a small cast of interesting characters who you can get to know through chatting with them and progressing the story. Yes, you can actually talk to your companions in camp. This is not a companion RPG, and you will be talking to your companions throughout the game because they're quite literally in your ear through the game. but also you can go into camp and have individual conversations with them. There's just a limited amount of those conversations and you have to progress them. Naturally, it's also an RPG, so it's got a significant progression system that kind of falls into two camps, your gear and your magic. The way you upgrade your gear is through gathering up schematics in the world and getting raw resources from enemies or destroying pieces of the world alike, and slotting them into your gear through different materials in your final product, enhancing things like heat or cold resistance or damage output. And what resources you use actually change the look of the items that you're making, at least the colors of the item. The second method of progression is your magic, your weaving as it were. Weaving might be the key component to this game that kind of sets it apart. Throughout your time in the game, you get several different types of weaving, from elemental companions to ice bridges, telekinesis-like powers for lifting and hurling anything from rocks to entire apple carts at your enemies, or throwing them off of cliffs or against walls to stun them and then beating them with your sword. The weaving takes advantage of a physics-based system, and the world itself seems like your playground the more you advance through your weaving. Hell, you can even use your weaver's grasp to catch fireballs and hurl them back at your foes. Although I will admit, just getting that one little bit of footage was it was kind of I failed a lot at it. You know what? Fine. This is the behind the scenes of trying to catch that one fireball. But one of my favorite things that I could do was that you could actually use your ice to pin larger enemies to the ground temporarily. I mean, this was just fun and cool. You pin them there, you have a short time frame while they're stuck against the ice, and you actually have to connect the strand from their head to the floor for it even to work, and you can actually see them looking at you and just being kind of pissed off while you beat on their face with your sword. I hit a lot of things with my sword in this game. A whole lot of things. In all honesty, the weaving and learning just how to best utilize it in different situations was by far the most fun and exciting thing about the game to me. I will say though, it took a while to start to get into it, as you don't get all of your weaving skills all at once. You have to find them, and you have to get them by taking on these giant enemies. And the giant enemy fights are really where the game shines. I think it really shines the most in that. It's not that the other combat is bad, like throwing things off a cliff is pretty cool, hitting things with, big benches and stuff. But being able to climb and attack these gigantic automatons or dragons or drakes, I guess is technically a drake or a wyvern, I don't know. Someone say in the comment section what it is. Or the gigantic salamander like lizard thing that can, just happens to also be able to suck in everything and throw it at you. Basically, all those giant things. It's kind of like a Monster Hunter type vibe, like a solo Monster Hunter thing going on, or maybe a Dragon's Dogma type where you're climbing up on big enemies and taking them out. It's an awesome and fun experience. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that could be done better in this game, or things that, at least for me, are things that I thought like could use a little bit of improvement, some kind of negative things about the game. So let's talk about those too. I think in the game, with the progression system, there is an over-reliance on crafting and resource gathering. It's key to really everything you do, and primarily the method of vertical progression in the RPG. It's all about gathering those materials and crafting things. Having a skill system or experience system would make it feel more RPG-esque and also give more reason to plow through enemies. I often found I was trying to avoid enemies more often than not at different times because I just didn't want to mess with them, because there was no benefit to fighting them really. Especially if I knew that they weren't going to drop the kind of resources that I needed. That's also in part because a lot of those enemies are, well, the same. The game could do with more enemy types, more different types of things, but I know that doesn't really play into the story, so I guess that's a whole lot of the reason why. Or it could also just in part be due to the limitations of the studio being indie and this being their very first project, so I can't fault them too much there, especially since we do get a decent variety. It's more of the trash NPCs that I think needed more variety. But the enemies that they do have, especially those epic fights, they're pretty incredible. And as I said earlier in the positives, those really stand out as being awesome, especially as you get further into the game. But early on, especially as you're trying to learn those fights, those epic fights that do feel epic, they kind of seem to take a bit too long sometimes, especially for some of the rewards that you get. The risk versus reward or the time investment doesn't always feel worth it for them, outside of the weaving upgrades especially. My next two and final places that they could improve kind of go hand in hand. I wish I had more choices and more companion depth. There are choices to be made and you learn more about each companion, and it's obvious they have a good amount of depth to them and that they're well written. Like, I especially liked how natural the dialogue felt throughout, but it feels more like you are watching a story play out instead of having really agency in the story more often than not. And all of those personalities, everybody that's with you tends to lean toward being good. Maybe a little too good, a little too safe, I guess is probably the best way to put it. It makes the whole game feel a little bit like a feel-good RPG. But you know what? Sometimes that's a good thing. A little bit of like, you know, just pure hero's journey kind of thing where everyone is a Sam or an Aragorn. You know, maybe sometimes that's a little bit of a good thing to have. You don't always need a Boromir, I guess. Overall, I had a fantastic experience with Eternal Strands, especially with how easy it is to currently access in this game. If you want to play Eternal Strands, they have a demo that you can go play for free, or if you have Game Pass, you can go play that. And if you have Game Pass, that also means that in just a couple of weeks, you'll also be able to be playing Avowed on Game Pass. So it might be a good month. And I'm not paid by them or anything, so just something to consider. You play Eternal Strands until Avowed comes out and then play Avowed. Honestly, I'm looking forward to more games from Yellow Brick Games in the future to see where they go from here. Do they continue in this world? Do they continue with this sort of physics-based type of gameplay? I'm really curious to see, and I'm happy to see a new studio putting out such a quality game for their very first indie RPG. My name is Edward Flynn. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a absolutely wonderful day. And remember to throw your enemies from high towers. That's in games. Only in games. But I was already eager to give Yellow Brick Game because you see the creator, but I was already predisposed to give Yellow Brick. Yep. Can't talk today.